Good day. This is Professor Toivo Korvikowski. I'd just like to offer some reflections on this event that is now ongoing, that we are in the midst of, and to point to some of the political and perhaps philosophical ramifications of what we're experiencing now in this global pandemic. And the first point I'd like to raise is kind of an obvious one, and that is that this is, properly speaking, a global event. It's quite clearly made possible by globalization, by global transportation networks, and to an extent also by global communications networks that allow us to witness this unfolding in real time the world over. And it's a global event in that it involves all of us. It is an existential threat. By that I mean that there's an encounter with mortality that's involved. It threatens our very existence, and it challenges us as a human species, both as communities and as individuals, to articulate who we are. If we think of our own mortality, that existential encounter, forces us to ask, who are we? And what is it that makes life worth living? And then we need to answer. Then we need to answer that. And I would just paint in very broad strokes here two kinds of answers to that crisis. Crisis is a point of interest. English word crisis comes from the Greek crisis, and that means just a choice, quite simply. So what can we choose? On the one hand, I would say there's the possibility of encountering this existential threat with then a recognition of the interdependence of our situation. An understanding that others on the far side of the planet have fates that inflect upon our own fates. That these relations are not just externalities, that there are people out there in the world, maybe even people that could be useful or dangerous to us, but that these relations are constitutive. The relations make us who we are. So you are the daughter or the son of so-and-so and so-and-so, and the friend to these people, and the citizen of this community. Those relations form us in our subjectivity, in our sense of who we are, in terms of our identity, and in terms of what we value as being worth doing. The relations are constitutive in those senses. And here, what we witness in this global pandemic, in this global event, is that, again, the fates of others aren't externalities, but that what we're witnessing affects us in an essential way. Our fates are linked. The other is not out there. The other has a place within our own fate as well. That's one very, in general terms, one approach to this existential threat. The other response to fear is an atomizing response, an isolating response. Fear can have us think of ourselves first. I'm sure you've seen on social media and elsewhere the various responses. Are we bringing groceries to elderly people, or are we hoarding toilet paper? And not to be trite about this, but crises bring out the very best and the very worst in human beings. Aristotle says in the Politics that human beings, when perfected, are the very best of animals, and when we're degraded, we are the very worst. Precisely because we're so flexible, because we have so many choices presented to us. And we could approach this crisis with an us versus them mentality. We see a strong indication of that from the US president when he describes the virus as the Chinese virus rather than as the coronavirus. The political reasons for that are abundant and clear. It's a way of shifting blame the virus on those others, those foreign others. And it's a way of relocating blame. We're not to blame. And in terms of the political consequences of that, we have the option, on the one hand, to recognize that we need an effectively coordinated global response, and the only way we'll do that is through multilateral channels. Things like the WHO, the World Health Organization, is super helpful right now as a means by which national health authorities can get to know what's happening in other countries so as to field an effective response. Or alternatively to that multilateral rules-based system, there's the hard sovereigntist position, the everyone for themselves position. Can we seal off our state from others? And we see some indication of that. Again, there's talk just today from the White House of militarizing the Canada-US border. That would be historic. It is the world's largest, longest undefended border, and it would be historic if that were to change according to that hard sovereigntist model, the hard-shelled model of the state, the walled state. And this takes us to the questions raised by Grant and Byers. You know, what is Canada for? I think there's been a lot that has been admirable, laudable about the Canadian approach. We have taken a human security approach as opposed to a national security approach. And by that I mean, you know, we understand security not just as the defense of territorial borders against invading armies or what have you, and the policing of the population. That's national security. We understand that security, human security, is multivariant. We need not just freedom from the fear of criminality, but access to clean air, clean drinking water, public health, things like this, and perhaps even, you know, economic sustenance. Do we broaden the basket of goods provided by the state and that citizens demand of the state according to the social contract? So that has been, I think, a distinctively human approach to say that this is a human security event. Public health is super important. Public education is very important. And just recently, with the federal bailout package announced yesterday, it's important that the government get funds in the hands of citizens so that they can continue to live even when they're unemployed.